Hello and welcome back to Sacred Psychology. I'm Dr. Wichterman. Today, I want to talk about pornography and loneliness. Isn't that fun? It's a difficult subject. I even feel a little uncomfortable with it, and I've counseled guys for years with these struggles. But first, before I get into it, I want to ask you to like this video, subscribe to this channel. The channel's been growing a whole lot faster than I ever would have hoped. It's not exactly growing like by the speed of light, but it's fast enough for me. And I want to thank all of you who've already supported me in this work. It means a world to me and the world to my family in the end. So the Jeffrey Epstein files were released recently, implicating all kinds of powerful people. Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, of course, we've always had suspicion about that he's been asked only once about it, but there's been news about it for years. Jeffrey Epstein himself, Prince Andrew, other billionaires, I can't even think of their names, have all been implicated. Of course, nobody outside of Epstein has been convicted of anything, but their names are in the documents. It's even listed people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump for communication and different things that have happened, but they haven't been implicated negatively that I can tell just yet. I don't really have time to get into the documents too deeply, but what I'm learning from different news sources is that there are even satanic rituals listed in these things, and almost like a crime mafia gang where you had to do certain things to get into it, which involves sleeping with people that weren't your wife, sleeping with underage people, and even murder of children and child sacrifice and satanic rituals and all these different wild, crazy, evil things. And almost as if there's like this Illuminati, this powerful group of people, of upper class billionaires who are just controlling things and putting each other in positions of power. It's almost like every weird movie around those kind of things that we've ever seen has come true. Now, it's all still alleged because they have to go through the process of charging and convicting and all those kinds of things, but this is really just something out of a movie. So yes, I have been thinking about pornography and loneliness. I hear Jeffrey Epstein, satanic ritual, child trafficking, all those kind of things, and I think pornography and loneliness. Because I think in part, where did this start for these guys? Were they abused themselves as children? Did they get so powerful they thought nobody could stop them and just lost control of their senses and morality if they ever had any in the first place? And a lot of this, historically, when you look at research and kind of things, starts with simple pornography and then it grows over time. And the research would suggest that I've read recently that sometimes pornography, the use of it causes loneliness, and sometimes the loneliness spurs people on to use pornography. And those are not the only things that are connected. It's a giant web, but I want to be pretty specific here about those two things today. But first, before I get too far into it, I want to tell you a story. There was a time a few years back when I was involved in a men's Bible study, and the focus of that particular Bible study was on pornography, of faithfulness to our wives, of keeping ourselves pure, of all of those kind of things that we talk about in church. And I want to be honest, pornography has never really been my issue. I had the privilege of having an incredible father who talked me through certain situations at specific ages, never caused me shame, never caused me fear, was there to support me and explain things to me. And what I came out with of those conversations was this stuff will hurt you. You will get momentary pleasure, but it will harm you long term. And you don't want any part of that. And I had such a close relationship with my dad that I trusted what he said, and I was able to follow through, and by the grace of God, was able to avoid a lot of that pain and sorrow. Now, I have my own issues. Anxiety runs in my family. I struggle with anger from time to time. Like everybody has their stuff. And I've struggled with other forms of escape. I get lost in projects. I get lost in TV shows. I do mindless doom scrolling, things that make me numb without ever healing me, so I don't have to feel my emotions from time to time. I was there that night, though, to try to support these men and build relationships with them and remind myself of why it was important to not be involved with those things. And I listened as man after man described the same torment and shame, the fear of telling their wives, the fear of being found out. There were several that was just like, I could never tell my wife. I could never be honest with her about this. They felt so much shame. And yet these men, they felt almost no hope. Not because God wasn't present, but because their struggle had roots that they didn't know how to reach in and deal with. And as we talked, it became clear that the issue went deeper than willpower. Many lacked awareness of what was happening inside them emotionally. They didn't know how to sit with pain, loneliness, stress, shame, anxiety without escaping. And when shame is high, secrecy grows. And when secrecy grows, isolation grows. And when isolation grows, hopes start to die. And when hope dies, the struggle gets even louder, and we just dive further into whatever is numbing us. And in this case, it's pornography. Pornography isn't rare anymore. It's not under your best friend's father's bed. It's routine. It's all over the place. Even stuff that's not supposed to be pornographic might as well be. And for a lot of people, it's not even mainly about sex, it's about relief. I've seen it in client after client after client. It was relief from stress, from sorrow, from pain. Even temporarily, it was relief. Relief from loneliness, from what's happening inside overall. And if we miss that, we'll misunderstand why it's so hard to stop. It's not just a habit you try to get over. This isn't a shame lecture, it's a psychological map. I've looked at the research over the years and I've just reviewed it recently before I'm making this video. And it's also not going to be simplistic. I'm not going to pretend everyone who has ever viewed pornography is addicted, but I'm also not going to pretend that pornography is neutral or harmless because the function matters and the patterns matter. So let's zoom out first because context matters. Pornography use has become increasingly common worldwide, even with women. And one major reason is straightforward: widespread access to the internet, especially on mobile devices. What used to require effort now requires almost none. It's private, it's immediate, it's always there. And when something is always there, it becomes the default option. Guy after guy after guy feels stress, go straight to the phone that I've worked with over the years, especially for people who are stressed, lonely, and bored and emotionally overwhelmed. It often seems like that's where they go, especially if they're already in the habit. So the question isn't, can people access pornography? The question is, why do people return to it over and over and over and over again? And why do some people return to it even when they regret it afterwards? Immense shame for many. There are two different conversations people confuse here. One is this clinically problematic, meaning distress, impairment, loss of control, escalation, relational harm, which is true. The other is it neutral? Meaning, does it shape the brain? Does it shape expectations? Does it shape intimacy? Does it shape perception over time? Even if someone claims it isn't a problem, which they often do. Those are different questions, and we need both if we're going to be honest. A lot of research finds men, particularly younger men, report higher frequency, more time, and more pornography use with more positive attitudes about it. So the more they use it, the more they try to say it's fantastic, it's wonderful, I love it. But pornography research has often been male centered, and women may underreport use due to stigma and gender role pressures. So we keep humility about what we think we know from the typical samples. I've even read research that said as high as 90% of men in the conservative church use pornography actively. And it was somewhere in the 60s for pastors. It's been a while since I looked at that research. Those numbers are just a touch fuzzy. The most important factor, though, isn't gender, it's function, because pornography use is not one single thing. We often reduce pornography to quantity. How many times did you use it this week? How much, how often? But the research and the clinical reality both suggest you have to look at the whole pattern. Is it solitary or shared? Is there emotional distress involved? Is it tied to loneliness? Is it being used as education or escape? Is it connected to sexual well-being or to avoidance? Is it escalating? Is it causing relational withdrawal? Is it turning into something compulsive, obsessive, something that your brain has to have? It's addictive. Two people can watch the same amount and have two entirely different outcomes because the why is different. One person is curious, maybe occasional, no distress, at least reported, no secrecy, no visible impairment. Another person is using it like medicine for an internal problem they can't name. And that's where things start to intensify. So, what are the motives that pull people back? When pornography becomes a coping strategy, when it becomes emotional regulation, then it stops being recreation and starts being reliance. And I would argue it's almost always reliance. It's rarely just recreation. This is not to say that recreation is healthy. No, pornography is healthy. It damages our view of the opposite sex. It dehumanizes participants. It changes expectations for spouses. It's never healthy. There are, however, degrees to this unhealthiness. And I would dare say part of the reason these folks in the Epstein circle were able to do these awful, terrible things to these people was because they dehumanized them. Client after client after client will tell me part of the reason I can do this and look at these women in this way and do these things to my own body in light of looking at these women and becoming aroused is because they don't seem real. So, to understand this porn loop, you could call it, you have to understand emotional regulation because regulation is what most people are trying to actually do. Emotional regulation is what happens when something rises up inside of you. That's like stress, loneliness, anxiety, shame, sorrow, even brain inflammation can cause these kinds of things in people, and you can stay present with it without either exploding or escaping. So you're able to regulate those emotions and not go to the unhealthy habit, whatever that may be. So before I go any further, I want to humanize what I'm saying because I'm not talking about this from a distance. There have been many days when even I, after 10 and a half years of training, 19 years of clinical practice, 13 years of teaching, almost 14 now, have struggled to regulate my own emotions and hold space for other people's emotions without reacting. I can think without even trying of a dozen moments in the past year where I just couldn't handle the emotions of others or even what I was feeling in that moment. Sometimes life is just too overwhelming. Too much is happening at once. My kids are being loud. They're all playing their different stories. They're shouting. Doors are slamming. My wife's trying to get things to calm down. I'm trying to work. And if I'm in a season where I haven't been exercising, taking care of myself overall, eating well, lifting weights, running, sleeping enough, spending time with my wife, my capacity for regulation shrinks and shrinks and shrinks till it's gone. And if that can happen to me, it's not hard to believe or understand how the average person without all this training and understanding in this world who's stressed, lonely, anxious, and ashamed, they struggle to stay present and they start looking for a way out. And pornography is an easy way out. It's accessible, it's cheap, it's private, and it gets you out of an emotional space quickly. And that's why willpower isn't the whole story. For many people, pornography isn't just about desire, it's about relief. It's like you're taking care of a physical need beyond even the sexual. A helpful way to think about emotional regulation is that it includes understanding and accepting what you feel, being able to control impulsive behavior when you feel bad, and being able to use flexible strategies that match the moment and align with your goals. So, emotional regulation isn't never feel distress, or if you feel anything at all, there's something wrong with you. It's more, I can feel distress and still choose a healthy response. You see this as a problem all over the place in people's lives. I always like to hammer on the church, but it's true of most people. We don't know how to regulate our own emotions. We aren't taught to by our parents, we aren't taught to in the schools. And if we do, they're just teaching us breathing techniques. It never seems practical. We all sit back and roll our eyes. I went to public school. I know how that works. So, more than just being aware, are you taking care of yourself in such a way where you are exercising, eating well, spending time in silence and solitude, participating in activities that feed your soul? Are you setting yourself up for healthy ways to avoid damaging habits like pornography? When those skills are missing, those emotional regulation skills, when awareness is low, when tolerance is low, and your strategy is limited, people don't regulate, they avoid. Why do you think we all doom scroll? We do it all the time. We're avoiding. Pornography is just a more addictive, maybe not more addictive, but I'll say it for today, a more addictive way to handle those emotions. So a lot of people aren't regulating emotions. They are avoiding them. We were never really taught as a society. Our parents haven't taught us. They were survivalists in many cases. My parents were recovering hippies, I always like to joke, and so they taught me more about emotions than maybe most parents. A lot of people aren't regulating emotions, they're avoiding them. And we haven't been taught how to regulate our emotions overall as a society. I live in the Midwest, and the best thing to do around here is to stuff your emotions and act like they're not even there. And then we all get cancer. And it's not always because these people are weak or immoral, or that because I'm always weak or immoral. Often it's because they don't have the skills, the awareness, the internal language to work with what's happening inside, especially when they're so stressed, tired, not well taken care of. So instead of noticing the feeling and naming it or learning to tolerate it and choosing a response, they short circuit the process and they react like a person who's lost their senses. We're living in a culture that treats silence like a problem to solve. Noise is constant, stimulation is endless, and our attention is always being pulled somewhere else. But the emotions we avoid don't disappear. They wait for us in the quiet. That's why we try to avoid the quiet. And it takes maturity to sit with what's real long enough to understand it, integrate it, grow from it, work through it, reprocess it, whatever counselor word you want to use. Distraction offers relief without maturity. And if you combine constant distraction with loneliness, stress, and shame, people will reach for something that turns the volume down as fast as they can. Pornography becomes medicine for the skill gap. It's fast, it's acceptable, it's predictable, it changes your state quickly. To restate it, it's a form of self medication, a lot like what people use drugs for. So, for many, the moment of use is relief, distraction, arousal, emotional disassociation, a shut off switch, this feeling of euphoria that can happen. But afterward, there's regret, shame, guilt, and anxiety. And often the shame is intensified because the person's values are violated. This is especially true if somebody has a personal problem with pornography. So their values are violated, or because they feel like they've objectified someone, or because they don't like what they are becoming, because it changes you over time. So negative emotions can lead someone to pornography, and pornography can intensify negative emotions, especially shame afterward. And so those negative emotions in that loop and the use of pornography and the emotions that follow, that flows into the brain's learning loop. When something reliably changes in your internal state, your brain tags it as important. So pornography isn't just an act, it becomes a learning pathway. Distress shows up, porn reduces distress, the brain remembers. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I always recommend folks read. Talks about these kinds of things. The next time distress shows up, the brain offers porn faster. Goes right to it. It's like every time these guys in my office, it's like every time distress, boom, 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 right to it. And it's so easy and accessible. For some of them, we had to start having them put their phone by the door so it was harder to get to, so they could get past that reactive state and not go straight for it. Some neuroimaging research has found associations between pornography consumption and the frontostriatal reward network in healthy men. And research on compulsive sexual behavior has found that greater neural responses to sexually explicit cues, including activation in the reward regions of the brain, such as the ventral stratum, in individuals with compulsive patterns. This doesn't prove that porn damages everyone's brain, though I would argue it affects it somehow negatively in every single case. But it does support what many clinicians see. For some people, especially those with problematic patterns, porn becomes cue driven. Boom, 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 porn. Loneliness cues it, stress cues it, boredom cues it, conflict cues it, and the urge becomes more automatic over time. Now let's ask the question, what emotional cues show up most often in the literature and in real life? There are two huge ones, and they're loneliness and stress. One of the most consistent patterns is that pornography use and loneliness often travel together. They're good companions. For some people, loneliness predicts pornography use, especially among those with attachment anxiety or fear of rejection. Loneliness can also help explain why pornography use correlates with lower life satisfaction in certain studies. Loneliness is not just, I don't have people. Sometimes loneliness is, I'm not known. I'm not chosen. I don't feel seen. I feel emotionally disconnected. I don't have any close friends that hear me and see me. And those states are uncomfortable enough that the brain goes looking for relief. Porn can mimic intimacy without vulnerability. It can feel like closeness while costing you nothing relationally in the moment. But because it's not real connection, it often increases isolation afterwards. It gets worse and worse and worse, especially when shame is involved. This is why pornography can become a coping strategy in the face of loneliness. And this is why porn and loneliness are so often found together. Now, to stress. Stress tends to reduce emotional flexibility. Under stress, we become more impulsive, our coping range shrinks, and we reach for what's fast. Lonely individuals also tend to cope with stress more passively. So you get a convergence. Stress makes regulation harder. Loneliness makes distress heavier. Pornography makes relief immediate, and the brain learns immediate relief quickly. It's reasonable to hypothesize that for many individuals, pornography functions like a self medication strategy, a way to cope with dysphoric internal states, especially loneliness and stress. One client discovered that every time he was overly busy or stressed, his desire for pornography would trigger. Every time he gave in, he would feel shame, and it just went around and around and around. It took us 18 months to get him out of that cycle. During COVID, especially, I worked with a series of young men between late teens to 40s. And the most common thread wasn't simply high libido, it was loneliness. Especially during COVID, we saw a huge spike in pornography use just anecdotally in the counseling room. It was loneliness. Their routines collapsed, their connection decreased, isolation increased. Some were single, alone at night with their thoughts. Some were in strained relationships. Many were carrying stress they didn't know how to name, let alone how to regulate. And pornography became a predictable response in stressful situations, especially moments that reminded them of their loneliness. A hard day, boredom at night, rejection, conflict, feeling unseen, feeling unwanted, having no place to go and just be with people. In the moment, porn offered relief, arousal, distraction, emotional disassociation, the sense of I can shut my brain off and just feel for a moment. But afterward, the negative emotions come back, often with shame and guilt and sadness and anxiety, and they are intensified. And for many, the shame was intensified because they believed pornography was wrong and they didn't know how to talk about it without feeling condemned. So they got stuck in a loop: loneliness, pornography, shame, isolation, loneliness, pornography, shame, isolation, around and around and around, and sometimes several times a day. This is why I want to make the point crystal clear. Pornography and loneliness are often found together, and emotional regulation is frequently the bridge between them. I would say that emotional regulation, outside of a lack of purpose and connection to our Creator, is our society's biggest problem. It's also too important to say that not everyone experiences pornography uses it as problematic in the clinical sense. Some people report no distress, no impairment, no loss of control. I find it hard to believe them in some of those cases because the longer they do it, the harder those things become. The next question is, can it still shape the brain's learning patterns, shape sexual scripts, shape intimacy expectations, what your wife and girlfriend should look like, and shape how we perceive other people? Even if they don't label it as a problem, does it cause those kinds of issues? For example, Kuhn and Gallinat study reported associations between pornography consumption and measures related to the frontostriatal network, including structural and functional connectivity findings in a sample of healthy men. And research on compulsive sexual behavior and problematic pornography use shows cue reactivity patterns, where cues predict erotic content, evoke stronger ventral striatal responses, that is, the wanting, consistent with cue driven reinforcement processes. Clinically, not everyone meets criteria for problematic use. It's the nature of the beast. But ethically and relationally, I don't treat pornography as neutral, because repeated exposure, especially to degrading scripts, can shape objectification and dehumanization patterns over time. So even when someone denies it's a problem, I still treat it as inherently risky and, in that sense, always problematic at a human and relational level. So here's the model. Many people are avoiding their internal emotions because they don't have the awareness or skills to regulate them. Pornography becomes the medicine: fast relief, fast escape. Relief reinforces the pathway in the brain. Afterward, regret and shame often show up, which drives secrecy and isolation. Isolation intensifies loneliness. Loneliness and stress become stronger triggers. And over time, repeated exposure can shape sexual scripts and objectification patterns, especially when the content is degrading to women. And frankly, friends, most of it is. So for people who feel stuck, the path forward usually isn't just try harder, it's learning how to regulate distress, repair shame, and rebuild connection. So porn is no longer your nervous system's default solution. So I'm going to do a part 2 for this. I'm going to show you how to break the loop, how to recognize your pattern, identify what the urge is really trying to solve, and build practical emotion regulation and connection skills so you're not relying on escape.